All right, good morning, everybody. Got our attendees trickling in here. John and Kevin, can you see the slide?
Yeah, all good.
Looks good.
All right. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining on Thursday morning, depending where you're located. Slight deviation in the time for us today. We usually run at 12 Pacific, but Dr. Sprouse is a busy man. He's all over the world working with his athletes and clients. So we're lucky to get him today and for him to share his expertise. And we're going to be digging into the nuances of working with high performance athletes. And for those of you who have been on our webinars before, we've covered a wide spectrum from chronic disease management to longevity. But in this webinar, we're really going to look into some of the intricacies when you're working with individuals who are working at the absolute highest level of physical training and performance. And that's Kevin's domain. He's got some amazing expertise to share with us. So we're excited to dig in here. Our agenda for today, first we'll start with some intros. Then we're going to turn it over to Kevin. And he's going to share with us exactly what he looks at with his athletes in terms of biometrics, assessments, diagnostics. So really digging into the numbers that Kevin relies on day to day to help optimize and tune the performance of high performance athletes and other clientele working at very high levels, whether it's physical training or business or just life in general. Then Kevin's got some troubleshooting tips, mistakes he's commonly seeing, and how to address those. There's a few case studies that Dr. Sprouse is going to share, and then we'll have the Q&A. But with that said, Kevin, I'd like to first turn it over to you. And before you kick off, I just want to mention that Kevin's been a heads up user since the early days. Kevin, I don't know how you found us when we had like our early alpha product, but you did. And
Yeah,
you've had your practice podium on here for several years now, and you've been giving us great ideas on how to mature the product right from the earliest inception. So it's been great to have you along for the ride. You've been awesome as an advisor and giving us feedback and just being patient with us as we grew. And I'm sure we had a few bumps along the road. So it's just really been amazing working with you professionally and having you as a heads up customer over the years. So I just want to acknowledge that and express our gratitude from everyone here at Heads Up.
well, thank you. Yeah, we actually, a few years ago, I mean, it might be like 4 or 5, Dave. It's been a while, but
Yeah.
a while back, um, I went to one of my employees, team members, and said, "Hey, I want to build this platform. I want to build this thing that'll pull in all the data we're following, aggregate it, allow us to run analyses on it." And a couple of days later, he came back. He's like, "It might be built. Why don't you look at this?" And that's how we got introduced to you. And yeah, it's been great. I've it's been a great tool since the start, and it's only gotten better and better. It's been fun to have access to it. So,
So
uh,
tell
uh,
us about Podium and tell us about
yeah,
your background in medical expertise and then how you transitioned into performance medicine.
yeah. So I guess a brief intro. My undergraduate studies were in exercise science, so primarily exercise physiology and biomechanics, and I was really interested in human performance, but didn't quite know where to go with that after college. And eventually, I say eventually, I took a few years and I was a backcountry guide and rafting guide and things like that. But eventually, like settled down, went to med school. And while I was there, the whole idea was to go into sports medicine, but in my head, that was orthopedics, because that's kind of how it's done in the US. And so I was funneling toward orthopedics. And when it came time to kind of do the internships and figure out what I liked, I realized I actually didn't love orthopedics. I liked it, but it's not what I was wanting to do. And so I backpedaled a bit, ended up doing an emergency medicine residency just because it's kind of a shotgun. I figured I could be good at a lot of things in emergency medicine. And only a couple years into that did I realize that you could do a fellowship in sports medicine from emergency medicine. My chief resident at the time introduced me to the concept. I was like, wow, I had no idea. So started applying to fellowships, got into fellowship, and at the same time I was really interested in cycling just as a personal hobby. And so my interest in human performance, medicine, sports medicine, and cycling led me pretty quickly to work in professional cycling. Even while I was still in fellowship, I was working at a team that became a world tour, like Tour de France cycling team. So for 15 years now, I've worked as a team doctor and medical director for a world tour cycling team. And the past 2 years for them, I've been kind of a sports science consultant, stepped away from the day to day, like on the road, 80 days a year travel, and doing a little bit more consulting. That kind of coincided with the founding of my practice, which is called Podium, where I work with initially endurance athletes, so cyclists, triathletes, marathoners, and then that kind of spread to working with baseball players, MMA fighters, a lot of PGA players, just kind of a full spectrum of professional athletes. And then also working with, I guess, more executive folks who are interested in having a kind of a team doctor approach, that accessibility and high level of interaction. And so that's what I do now is I've got my Podium practice where we cap the number of patients at 35 patients that we work with at a given time. They sign on for a year at a time, and it's very interactive where we work with them on, well, like you'll see, nutrition, training, sleep and recovery, just kind of everything we do with our pro athletes. Yeah, so that, in a nutshell, that's a short version.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Quick introduction for Dr. Lemansky and myself. I'm Dave Korsunski. I'm the founder CEO here at Heads Up. And John, you want to say a quick hello?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm John Lemansky. I'm the Chief Medical Officer. My background is in internal medicine, and I worked in the hospital system for many years, found that we weren't really treating the root cause of diseases, but just kind of, patching people together. Started my own separate practice focusing on wellness prevention, and then joined Heads Up as the Chief Medical Officer and as an active user and participant. So really interested to hear what Dr. Sprouse has to say today. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thanks, John. And then in the chat, we have our subject matter experts. Katrine is in the chat. I know she had an emergency with one of her patients, so she may be a little bit late. She just texted me, but she's always really quick to answer any questions that come up in the chat. So if she's not here yet, she'll be along momentarily. And then also we have Chuck and Madison. They can also help answer questions about any of the content we're presenting here, how to get more information. If you hear something that you're interested in, just ping them and they'll grab your info and make sure that we follow up with you. Just a bit about Heads Up and our company. As Dr. Sprouse mentioned, he was out there capturing all this data, and the data was coming from sensors and blood tests and assessments that he was doing, and that's the problem that I saw in the industry. I had that problem personally, and we set out to build a system that is basically data agnostic. And the goal with Heads Up is that we are able to ingest data from any source, whether it's coming from a continuous glucose monitor, an EHR system in the conventional healthcare world, a PDF file. We ingest it all. And so we're taking otherwise fragmented data and then cleaning it all up and putting it in a structured format so that we can build actionable tools on top of it. And our primary markets are integrative medicine, concierge medicine, and longevity medicine. And then what we really want to do is work with practices like Dr. Sprouse. And Dr. Sprouse should be able to log into a system and very quickly be able to find the information he needs. And that could be outcomes for one individual. And he's going to show you how he can go in and find those individual outcomes, but then also outcomes across an entire team. For example, a whole team of riders. and can we look at their aggregate HRV average, for example, across the team. So we'll be looking at how Heads Up is engineered effectively to build individualized and then cohort outcomes. We also do some work in medical research, clinical validation. A lot of brands come to us with products they want to test. So for example, they'll come to us with a product or service targeting sleep and say, hey, can we benchmark this on 100 people with an Oura ring, for example? So we're also doing a lot of the research work, but mainly focused on making it easy to stitch data together and track the outcomes that you need, whether you're working with a Tour de France athlete or someone with type 2 diabetes. It's really just what outcomes do I need to measure across the practice, and that's really where we want to specialize. We have some awesome sponsors. These are companies that we work with, some of our best partners, and they've contributed some giveaways today. And we'll be calling out. We have 4 different prizes at the end, and we'll select someone from the chat at the end. 4 people from the chat. The first giveaway is from our partner Oura, and we've had an incredible integration with Oura for a long time. Kevin, I think you're sharing some specific examples of data you look at. So we're giving away 1 ring. So after the webinar, if you're selected, we'll send you a sizing kit and a ring. Our good friends at True Diagnostic, they're giving away the True Age test for biological age. Our friends at Delta G, they've got a ketone gift pack. Those are some of my preferred ketones right now. So you get a chance to try those, about $260 worth of ketones. And then we'll also have a Heads Up. If you're an existing Heads Up customer or you're interested in using the service, you get a $500 credit on the subscription. So keep it fun, give away some cool stuff, and a little plug for our partners that we work with on the daily. So first polling question here. And now that we've done our introductions, we would love to learn a little bit about you. So I'm going to bring up the first polling question. There it is. So tell us a bit about yourself. We'd love to learn a little bit more. This will help us make sure that we are putting the right content together on a monthly basis, and that we're building our product and finding the right people who are a good fit for what we do. So I'll leave that up for a minute here while we keep going. And Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you for the feature presentation here today, and walk us through what you're doing over at Podium and how you're working with these individuals at the highest level of performance. Over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dave. Those giveaways are pretty fun. I wish I'm not.
They get better every webinar, actually. We just keep throwing more good ones in there.
No, it's good stuff. And actually all stuff that we use with patients. So it's timely, I guess. Yeah, so again, a little bit about the patients I'm working with, just to frame a bit of what it is I'll be talking about. Professional athletes are one category. I mentioned, cycling, endurance stuff, but also kind of the full end of the spectrum. Yesterday, we were having conversations about the nutrition for a PGA player, and then also for an Olympic level boxer. And it's, just night and day difference, but a lot of fun to deal with these folks. And then recreational athletes make up a decent part of this as well. And typically it's recreational athletes who are, the second and third categories here kind of overlap. They're very enthusiastic about their health. Oftentimes they're fairly successful from a business standpoint, and they measure and track and manage everything they can about their life. In some ways that's good. In some ways we end up kind of trying to widen their focus a bit. And one of the things about Heads Up is nice is we can kind of use different tiles, different metrics to show them and take others away, and really kind of give them the insight we want them to have. So, but the folks that we're dealing with are usually very active. I tell people my role is rarely to try to get someone to be more active. I'm usually pulling the reins and saying, how do you do it better? How do you do it more effectively? How do you recover better? And that's unique in medicine, having practiced in the hospital setting as well. In the hospital, oftentimes it's, can I just get you to walk a little bit, right? And here it's like, can you just not train twice a day, 7 days a week? Can we back it down?
No, we're junkies here.
Right. So recognizing that it's a different patient population, I think a lot of this stuff though trickles down to the rest of us. So I'm no elite athlete, but I can learn a lot about my training and my health from what they do and how to implement it in a smart way in my life. And that's kind of how I try to paint this to patients who are closer to me in terms of what they're trying to do and accomplish. As highly technologically advanced as we are, I'm going to be saying next slide to Dave, which I just kind of love. So things that we look at daily and weekly in our patients, if we're talking about metrics, I don't look at everything every day, and we don't do deep dives all the time. So, day to day or week to week, I'm looking at training load or relative effort, which is one of the Strava metrics that we're able to pull into Heads Up. Strava is a platform, if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of a social media for athletes and active individuals where you can bring in your training files. So if you go for a 5K run and you stop your Garmin watch and it uploads, it can go to Strava, your friends can see it, you can add pictures, that type of stuff. But it's also got a lot of fairly powerful training analytics in it. And we can pull over training load to see how that is trending for a patient. When I'm working with a patient, if I don't know how hard they've been training, I'm missing a huge part of their week or their day. And I see it constantly that patients come to me with a concern and they've had a great medical workup and nobody's really gotten a handle on how they're training. And when you look at that, the answer is fairly evident with what's going on. And so having visibility in that, I think, is huge for lots of doctors in different types of practices. If you have someone who's moderately active, knowing what that looks like is really important. We'll talk about why. Body weight, I look at a 7-day rolling average, which you can do in Heads Up when you go to the advanced metrics and then click the average. I'm much more interested in that than the day-to-day fluctuations. I want to see across time, how's that smoother line looking? We'll look at their resting heart rate variability, respiratory rate, and sleep duration. And that pretty much every Monday and Friday, I look at those metrics on our patients. Not necessarily every day. It can be a little noisy if you do that. But this allows me kind of those bookend of the week check-ins. Next, Dave. So that was what we do on just a regular recurring basis. And then with all of our patients, we take dedicated time to do what we call assessments. They're kind of deeper dives into these 3 foundational aspects of health and performance. So we may take anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks on any one topic and really dig in with the patient on what they're doing, how that's impacting them, what effect do we see from that, and then what do we want to change? And then we'll work on changing those things and then recheck. So you can see where that would take some time and some resource. So with sleep, we'll look at habits. We'll use questionnaires to assess this, both validated clinical questionnaires as well as just some things we want to know about what they're doing, using screens before bed, things like that, what their environment is like. And by environment, I mean sleep environment. We'll look at metrics that may be captured by different devices that they use, whether that's an Oura Ring or an 8 Sleep or a Garmin watch, whatever they happen to wear that brings in the data we want to see. We'll look at it in such an assessment. And people often ask me, like, what's your favorite wearable? And while I do have opinions on that, the true answer is whatever the patient's going to wear continuously is my favorite for that patient. Because if I tell them that the best thing they can wear is this headpiece with all these wires and stuff, and we get amazing data, but they don't wear it, I mean, it's useless. So if they have something that is marginally good, but we can gather months and months or years of longitudinal data, I'll take that every time.
Yeah,
And then
comment on that,
sometimes,
Kevin. I think
yeah,
like
yeah,
even though some of the numbers might jump around, let's just take HRV like from device to device. You know what I mean? Like one device says this, one device says that. It's still that device is still accurate to the individual, even if it doesn't match up
yeah,
exactly to the other one. And so, like you said, the main thing is getting those long-term trends rather than trying to compare minutia of a few milliseconds between one device or the other. Like you said, as long as you're getting that long contextualized history, the data becomes useful, correct?
for sure. I totally agree. And HRV is a great one to look at because you can even have two really accurate devices that use two different algorithms that are both
Yeah.
validated and both good data, but you can't compare them one to the other. So it's really about trends less than the accuracy of one data point.
Hey, and
Um,
one question on sleep, Kevin. I want to throw a
yeah,
controversial topic on the table here. I know when you and I were jamming out on like what we'd want to talk about here. You know, one of the cool things you mentioned to me was, well, this may not be the right place to bring it up. There may be a better spot, but you mentioned that in many cases you're working with individuals where you're recommending actually to eat before bed. And you know,
yeah,
we've all been beaten down by the Aura algorithm not to do that anymore. And but there are cases like that, which is, you know, kind of these outlier contexts specific to people who are training at a very high level. Can you speak a little bit to that?
for sure. And I wouldn't even call them outliers. I think a lot of stuff we see on social media and here on podcasts and things like that, they kind of gain this momentum without this groundswell of evidence. It's just that it becomes the hot thing to talk about. And so all of a sudden people aren't eating, 2 to 3 hours before bed because everybody's saying it's terrible. That's really good advice for some people. It's really bad advice for other people. And one example is you take an athlete or even just someone who's fairly active and has a stressful life and job on top of it. They have a calorie burn through the day that's fairly significant and may be hard to fully replace. And if someone goes to bed and they are at a caloric deficit of 800, 1,000 calories, we've even seen higher numbers than that, just because they burned so much and
Yep.
didn't get the food in, but 3 hours before bed they stopped eating, then usually somewhere around midnight to 2 a.m., the body recognizes the blood sugar is dropping and you release cortisol to kind of free up hepatic glycogen, to buoy those blood sugar levels. It's totally normal thing for the body to do, but cortisol is kind of the waking hormone. So it wakes you up. Sleep gets really disrupted. Recovery is poor. And the fix that we've found to that is really simple. It's a high protein, higher fat, low glycemic bedtime snack. So it can be a bowl of Greek yogurt, some berries, a little honey, 400 calories, pretty significant if there's a significant deficit. And then they sleep like a baby. So the point being, it's really situational. If your stores are topped off, you haven't burned a lot, you've eaten enough, maybe too much, don't eat close to bedtime. That's not going to help you
Gotcha.
sleep. But if you're totally empty, yeah, you need to fill it back up. So
And then
that's one of
Kevin,
the
what
things
else?
that we see in sleep. Yeah,
Okay, cool. Thank you. What else when you're talking about a sleep environment? There's a lot that can come into play there, especially there's mold exposure, for example,
mm-hmm.
in the home.
Yeah.
There's air quality, there's EMF, there's ambient room temperature. All of these things really add up. So anything specific you want to comment on when you're assessing a sleep environment with an athlete?
We've started sending our athletes environmental monitors for the room that look at air quality, noise levels. Light is really hard to assess. We've tried that, but pretty much everything says 0 lux unless like a light is turned on. Um,
Sure.
but we're CO2 levels. We'll talk a little bit about this in one of the case studies I have. But this is something that I find really, really interesting to dig into. For some people, not interesting for others.
Right on.
Yeah, so we'll come back around to that if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Back to you.
Cool. We do the same type of like, 1 to 2 month assessment with nutrition, where we'll look at, have them log food. We'll look at glucose monitor data, all sorts of stuff, gather a picture of what they're doing in the moment, see how that is perhaps suboptimal toward their goal, and then institute some change and recheck. And then we do the same with training and exercise. So across the course of a year, somebody may spend 6 cumulative months doing these assessments with our staff. But it's structured that way because what I've seen from a lot of executive health programs and things like that is people go in and get these massive workups over the course of 2 or 3 days and leave with a book of things they tested and need to be doing, and they just, it sits by the side of the table until next year when they go do the assessment again. And so we tried to figure out a way to do this in kind of a drip fashion instead of drinking from the proverbial fire hose. And this allows them to work on one thing at a time, kind of make some high yield changes and then move on to the next.
And I know, Kevin, you also said that when you're troubleshooting, sometimes you'll reintroduce an assessment for a period of time. For example, if someone's not performing at a certain level, you may do another 1-week food journal, for example, as part of your diagnostics. So I guess, is it fair to say that you'll introduce these also on an as needed basis when you're doing troubleshooting?
Absolutely. We'll frequently come back to a topic if there's an identified problem or a big goal. Somebody's got a big race coming up or a big tournament or something. Excuse me. And we want to really make sure that they're dialed in for that. We may go back to the thing that we know has been problematic for them in the past.
Cool.
Next slide. So we'll kind of run through these again. I guess I kind of just did this, so I won't belabor the point, but looking at sleep, it's sleep questionnaire, wearable data, subjective assessment. So looking at a daily questionnaire that we send out through Heads Up, that we get some of the feedback quantified there. And then the environmental assessment that I mentioned as well. Not everyone does that because not everyone, that's more of like a reactionary step. If we identify a problem we can't figure out the root of, but that's one of the things that we'll kind of go to if needed.
A couple questions here from the chat, Kevin. One is from Corey Daniels. What is the name of the environmental monitor that you're using or recommending?
We've actually used a few. And I'd say right now, if you've kind of polled our patients, there's probably 3 or 4 out there. One that I like right now is I think it's called the King Ping Air Monitor 2. You can get it on Amazon. It's maybe $100. And again, I've used $1,000 models that are much more validated, I guess. And going back to our previous point, the difference in measurement has been minimal, if at all. And this one is much easier to use and travel with. So this is kind of the monitor du jour, I'd say.
Yeah, I have one in my room from a company called Air Things. I just put the name into chat, and it's monitoring different size particles. It's monitoring VOCs, it's monitoring radon, and then it sends it to the mobile device. So I can always just kind of look at it and make sure that air quality is good. The other thing is these aren't expensive. I think the one I got was 200 or 300. And especially if you have them in different rooms, or sometimes even in different homes, you can start to look at the differences in the quality of the air from one environment to the next. So I use Air Things. You mentioned King Ping. Any others you want to throw on the table?
No, what I would say is I did kind of a deep dive on these when we started using them. Also because we were thinking about building our own, and the same way we found Heads Up, it's like, well, there's no reason to build it. There's all these companies that we're doing this monitor. And so I think there's probably 6 or 8, quite honestly, that are reasonable options. It's just a matter of which one you want to use. But the King Ping one is nice. It's really small. My patients travel a lot, so they can take it with them.
Okay. And then there was another question. What are the main environmental factors that you are finding that influence sleep? I think we've covered a lot of them, but anything else you'd want to comment on?
Temperature and humidity are big, air quality in general, which is particulate,
Particular matter.
concentration, and then CO2, which surprised me. I didn't think it would be. I kind of blew it off as probably not meaningful, and we'll in the case report I'll talk about how that changed my mind.
Awesome. Okay, moving right along. I think you covered a lot of this stuff already, but maybe you could click in a little bit to what you're looking at with the glucose monitors, because those are always very interesting. I know we have a lot of heads up customers that use those. So we'd love to know what you're looking at in the glucose data, athlete specific, and then anything else you want to comment on here as well.
Yeah, so I'd say when we're having them log food, we usually do it for 3 to 5 days and no more. I don't like it to become kind of a habitual thing, especially with athletes. They can get a bit wound up about it, weighing everything they eat. It can be maladaptive. And so we do it for a period of time and then kind of shut it down. And what we're looking for is primarily calorie balance, general idea of their macronutrient distribution, and fiber intake. And the reason I like fiber is because it's a really good proxy for food quality. If you're eating a high quality diet, you're getting a lot of fiber. If you're not, if it's processed, we can usually see it there pretty quickly. In the blood glucose, typically we're looking at, most of my patients aren't metabolically challenged. So if, like, I've had other doctors look at some of the data we see and they're like, oh, this is amazing. I was like, no, it's not for what we're looking at. It's great. Like, they're healthy individuals. But if they are overnight seeing blood glucose, dipping into the mid 70s, low 70s or below, that's really not entirely indicative, but very suggestive of underfueling. And so that's one of the things we'll look at. And like I said, we can correlate that with wake ups on the wearable and see where blood sugar drops. They wake up, they have kind of this seesaw through the night. So that's one that really jumps out to me. And then I want to see their glucose levels during exercise and how those respond. We may see some reactive hypoglycemia at the front end of a training bout. So somebody eats something 20, 30 minutes before they go exercise, which would seem reasonable, but they get an insulin response, about the time that they're starting to exercise. But at the same time, they kind of open those GLUT4 receptors on the muscle, and you've got an insulin dependent and an insulin independent pathway for that blood glucose to be disposed in the muscle. And all of a sudden, blood glucose tanks and they'll drop into the 50s while they're exercising, and then it'll come back. It's not dangerous, but it's really doesn't support a good training session. A lot of them come back, feeling very tired. They didn't exercise well. And so we had an MLB player in the off season who was continuously just feeling tired in training. He thought he wasn't eating enough. Turns out he was just eating at the wrong time. So we changed the timing of that meal, and then he was good to go.
Hey, Kevin, you also mentioned fasting insulin that you look at as a proxy for potential underfueling. I thought that was really interesting. We all think we want to see that fasting insulin and that HOMA-IR as low as possible, but there's actually situations where that's not the case. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, for sure. So, we get fasting insulin. We get labs on our patients at least 2, usually 4 times a year. And a fasting insulin that is dropping much below about 3 is to me kind of a red flag that they're under eating or under fueling from a carbohydrate standpoint. And so there is kind of this pressure. Again, if you're dealing with someone who needs to lose weight, is metabolically unhealthy, then we're trying to push that insulin down. And
agreed.
Really, there's no floor to that for that person. The chance that they're going to end up at 1.5, pretty unlikely. And if they do, in the short term, it's probably just fine for them. But for these athletes who have a high burn and have very glycolytic activity, so they're frequently either spending a lot of time above their lactate threshold, where they're burning more glycogen than fat, or they're spending a very long period of time at threshold and below, such that they, just for time moving, burn a lot of glycogen. and then maybe don't replace that with enough carbohydrate, we see those insulin levels really tail off. So I like to see them minimum of 3 in those athletes. Something around 4 to 6 is ideal.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else here, Kevin?
We do DEXA scans in all our patients, and one thing we're starting to do is test their metabolic expenditure with doubly labeled water, and we can do that, at home on a standard week, or also look at maybe an altitude training camp and really dial in their needs in an environment that's different than what they've previously tailored their nutrition to. So it's not something we do with everyone, but it's a helpful piece of information for some folks.
Right on. John, anything you want to throw on here?
Yeah, you have also on here the glucose tolerance test. What are you actually looking for based on that with the athletes?
Yeah, so we'll have them do the glucose tolerance test at home with the CGM. We'll send them 75 grams of a glucose mix, and for our pro athletes and those that are training 10, 15, 20 hours a week, it's really not that pertinent, and we may skip it with them. For our recreational athletes, it can be telling. Some of them maybe overeat for the amount of activity that they do. They think they do more than they do. And so they can get into kind of some pre-diabetic. I found myself in this state years ago, sleeping terribly. I was a resident and a fellow, sleeping 4 hours a night, training, just pouring carbohydrates down to stay awake at 2 o'clock in the morning. And my A1C was like 6.1 or 6.2. And so in that profile, someone who's hard charging, waking up really early to train, not eating well, not sleeping enough, this test can be telling.
Yeah, I asked that
John?
question. Yeah, I asked that question because that's how I kind of got into this, field of work. Same story. A resident burning, candle both ends, pre-diabetic, even though I was super athletic. So that was a good test to look at.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's probably a more common story than just you and me.
Yeah.
And then we look closely at their training and exercise. So again, most of the time we've got people who are training a lot, and we're trying to make sure they do it well. We'll do this often with their trainers or coaches. So we're not writing training plans for them, but we kind of help to oversee some of it. So we'll look at training load. We'll look at periodization, which is the idea that there should be hard weeks and easy weeks. If you just strip it down to the bare basics, but that you can't go hard all the time. And there needs to be kind of an ebb and flow to training. And with that, we'll look at how many weeks off they take in a year, how many months off in a year. Because even from a cardiac risk standpoint, there is some evidence that if you just train all the time, that you open yourself up to some risks like arrhythmias. Whereas if you train but then allow some time to recover and then train again, it's much more healthy in the long run. It's also better for performance. We do VO2 max and lactate on everyone. And then we like to see that everyone, regardless of their discipline, is doing both strength and endurance training. So we kind of dig into that a bit on an individual basis with them.
Question here. Any recommendations for ways to learn about VO2 max and how to use the data for athletes versus weight loss patients?
Yeah. I get this question a lot, and my answer is the same. It's not easy, but I would recommend taking a couple days or a week or whatever and going to your local university's exercise physiology lab and spend some time with the professors and grad students there, running tests and see what they're doing, what they're looking at. It's VO2 is an interesting metric. Lactate is much more usable. And so oftentimes they're doing the two side by side. I would really push people toward learning lactate physiology because it really tells you what you want to know about the metabolism. VO2 is kind of the high score on the video game, and it's meaningful. It's meaningful because it kind of tells you what the person's been doing for a long amount of time and aggregates it into one number. But it's less granular in that way. Whereas I can take two people with the same VO2 max levels and look at their lactate curves, and they'll be totally different if they're different types of athletes. And that may be good, that may be bad. It's really, depends on the situation. So learning the two in an exercise physiology setting is, I think, a fantastic thing for any doctor to do, quite honestly. I mean, I used to remember in the hospital getting lactate values back, and people would flip out because they were 4.5 or 5 in a patient who was septic. And I would ask, I was like, well, what is lactate? What are we looking at? Blank stare, and it's one of those things where unless you kind of understand what the test is and what's causing it, on the steps 3, 2, and 1 in front of that, it's really kind of disingenuous, I think, to use the test with a patient, to use that final number and say, well, here's your VO2 max. What does that mean? Like, you need to be able to kind of explain it each step along the way. And spending a little time with an exercise physiologist who will just love to talk to you about it is going to pay dividends better than any book you can read.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
Of course, we look at blood panels on all of our patients, both regularly and in a problem-focused manner if something's going on. I won't get into all this, excuse me, but I did just want to kind of show how we trend those in Heads Up, because it's one of my favorite features in there. And even when I go see my primary care doctor, who's a good friend of mine from middle school, I print this out with my labs and bring it to him. He's always like, this is so cool. How do you get this? So it's a great function, but we do pretty deep blood panels on everybody we work with.
Awesome. Let's see here. We'll move right along here. Okay, troubleshooting.
Yeah, so the things that we're typically trying to identify are, in a poor sleeper, how's travel impacting? Is it social jet lag? Are there poor sleep hygiene issues that are coming into play? In nutritional assessments in patients, are they underfed? Is it poor food quality? What are we seeing? What's causing the downstream things that we're seeing? And then for underperforming athletes, are they overreaching? Is that manifest in a HPA axis dysfunction? Is it ferritin insufficiency, iron insufficiency? So those are kind of the common troubleshooting things we're looking at. I think the next 3 slides are the case studies. So that'll kind of, I think, be some good things that we can talk through, looking at 3 different topics.
Sounds good. Let's take a few questions before we jump into the case studies. One question here is, how often are you running the blood panels? Preseason, mid-season, postseason? Assuming it's all of the above, but your comments there.
It is. So we do just rotely on every 6 months. We'll do a kind of what is standard for us blood panel. And it's kind of targeted to athletes and active individuals, but it's fairly wide reaching. And then if we identify anything in that, say, first annual panel, then at 3 months, we may recheck some values, not the whole thing. And then at 6 months, we'll do the big one again, and we may recheck. So I'd say most people get some blood drawn 4 times a year, 2 of those being big panels, 2 being kind of recheck targeted ones.
Copy that. And then question from Angela, can you upload lab data into Heads Up? Yes, that's a big part of what we do. We can take PDF files from virtually any lab and upload those. And then to Kevin's point, if I just go back here, what we'll do is we'll take all the data, even if the athlete has gone to different labs, Quest, LabCorp, Stanford, whatever lab they went to, we can put it all back on the trend line so that Dr. Sprouse is able to see as far back as he needs to. That also helps to identify what a baseline might look like, any outliers. So yeah, we'll put all of that information back on a single trend line. And then Kevin, when you're having your athletes test lactate and VO2 max, can you share, like, where are you sending them? What kind of equipment are you using?
Yeah, I mean, we do it a lot of times. My patients are coast to coast, and then in Europe also. And so when we have a chance, we'll do it when we're with them, and um, we'll we'll grab a treadmill somewhere or a bike, or kind of do it as a field lab test, like find a gym, but then we'll use like a lactate. Is it Lactate Pro? The handheld analyzer. It looks like a glucometer,
Yeah, I think
and
you told me about it. I bought one years
yeah,
ago after
yeah,
your
yeah.
recommendation. Looks like a glucometer.
Yep, and they're great, super easy to use. It you do need a little practice with it. Sweat has lactate in it, so if you get sweat in the sample, your numbers are all over the place. And we've had issues sending people places to do tests. We get numbers back, and you look at them like, this
Gotcha.
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But we've also identified kind of a network across the states where we will send people. Just like I'm sure any of you out there have your Rolodex of folks that are trusted references or referrals. If I've got somebody in Palo Alto or Manhattan or Austin who needs a test, like I know where to send them just because we've used them before and they're good.
Copy that. Thanks, Kevin. All right, case study number one.
All right, so this is a young guy, 28-year-old professional athlete. And we were doing an assessment of his kind of sleep and recovery without any thought that anything was off. Subjectively, it's like, yeah, I do fine. But we took the time, dug into the numbers, and we saw that he was recovering much better on the road than at home. And most of the time, it's either the same or they do better on the road. They get home, they're just kind of recharged, whatever. And this wasn't the case. Just time after time after time, he'd come home and his recovery would just tank. And so we were trying to figure out what was going on. Long story short, two things at play. One, the nutrition part we talked about earlier with the eating before bed. He was a guy who tended to come home, work out hard, have a high burn, to try to train up for the next tournament, the next time out. And would just go to bed under fueled. And so we'd got him eating before he went to bed, and that rectified a good bit of it, but not all of it. We still started seeing sleep disturbances and lower recovery numbers at home. And so that's when I actually sent him a environmental monitor. I was like, I don't know if we're going to see anything, but let's just see what we're looking at here. He had a home that was new construction, beautiful home, but the bedroom, super tight, no airflow in the new construction. Sleep with his door closed, his overhead fan he would turn off. He put a towel under the door because light came in, and he didn't want the light coming in. So super dark, but he was in like a sealed chamber basically. And his dog was in there, and his wife was in there. And we saw the CO2 numbers just like creep up through the night. The typically if you measure outside, it's going to be high 400s, kind of inside it's going to be low 600s usually. If you've been in the room and it's well ventilated, and his were getting into the low thousands at night. Research, there's published papers on this, and there's no like firmly identified threshold. 1400 is definitely problematic, but there's kind of a gray area from 900 to 1400 where people are like, I don't know, maybe it's a problem, maybe it's not. So, I mean, I presented it that way. I try to be very evidenced with stuff and straightforward. Be like, I don't know if the supplement's going to help because it's not great evidence for it, but here's how we're going to try it and measure it. And if it's no good, we'll toss it, right? And in the same way, I was like, hey, I don't know if it's going to help to increase airflow. I don't know if this is a problem, but let's do it and see what happens. And so one of the guys who works for me who found Heads Up was like, why don't you just leave the HVAC fan running to circulate the air? Don't turn on the compressor or heat air, whatever, just circulate air. Brought it back down to 650 and slept like a baby. So it was an eye-opening one to me to see how this accumulated CO2 was really impacting their sleep. I've since had some athletes take these devices to hotel rooms and check.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
a very old hotel in Italy, where they were getting numbers, just crazy numbers. I was like, I don't know, just open your window or try to find another hotel, but that's a bad place to recover. So that's one of the ways that we use that data.
So this one was a nutritional diagnostic and also an environmental diagnostic. And then presumably you were benchmarking this on some wearable.
Yeah,
Obviously, just subjectively sleeping better, but you were obviously then starting to see, okay, now when this person's at home versus on the road, they're equal, or actually the home should in theory be better recovery. So you started getting back to
yeah,
those types of numbers.
exactly. And it was objective through a wearable. Um, he didn't even fully realize it, but the numbers were pretty noticeable. And then once it was rectified, he was like, "Oh yeah, I feel a lot better during the day."
Yeah, there's a lot of things in the home. Even when I saw this slide and I saw newly constructed, there's so many chemicals in
Mhm.
anything newly constructed, from the mattress to the laminate on the floors to like the paint to like who the heck knows. So there's that whole side of it as well. But I guess that gets back to your point about like the environmental monitoring as part of the assessment.
Well, and that's kind of where my thought was when I sent it to him was, is it VOCs that are causing this?
Yeah.
And even that, I was kind of like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not very conspiratorial, and I don't like it takes. You got to show me some evidence for
Sure.
there being something there, removing it, and there being a better outcome. And so
Copy.
I wasn't even totally convinced on that. But I was like, let's just check and see, thinking we'd see VOCs up or particulate matter or something like that. Yeah, it totally surprised me that it was CO2.
Now that I'm thinking about this, we really at Heads Up need to look at some of these air quality monitors and see what data we can pull into our system, because that would be very
That's
interesting to
on my to
overlay
do
with
list,
other
Dave.
things. All right.
That's
Yeah,
on my
we'll
list
get
to talk to you about.
all right. Yeah, put it on the list for our next customer success call. But I would love to have that as well. So we'll see which models are out there, and maybe we can strike up a partnership with one of the ones you recommend, or we can look together on the market and see which one has an API that we can pull in that's high
Yeah.
quality. And if you're in the chat and you have a recommendation on any of those that you'd like to see us integrate, please let us know. Question from Dr. Gavin O'Handley. Do you recommend mouth taping to improve nasal breathing?
Yeah. I wouldn't say like across the board, but we do, when we start some of these assessments, we'll often send out a box full of stuff for the patient, as much to get them interested in what we're doing as anything else. But we'll send maybe some sleep supplements. We'll send some Somnifix, mouth tape. We'll send an eye mask, just some things to kind of get them thinking about what we're going to be doing, and also to play with and objectively measure. But that's one that for a number of people can be helpful if they can tolerate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kev. Next one, case study.
So this is a 26-year-old professional endurance athlete. This was a couple years ago. He's training for a very elite competition, and he was told he needed to improve his fat burning ability. I don't even remember who told him this, but somebody along the way was like, "Oh, you got to do this. If you eat fewer carbs and kind of ride below your threshold and really encourage fat burning, you'll see better body composition. You'll be stronger. You'll conserve glycogen. All these things that were very trendy a few years ago that have fallen away in elite sport because of this played out over and over. So he's doing that. He's feeling great. He's dropping a little bit of weight, which was good, or which was at least the goal of his. And he goes to an altitude camp, continues riding, gets up. He's at about 2,000 meters in Europe. Continues riding 4 to 6 hours a day, which is typical. And performance is just steadily declining. He's tired. His sleep is disrupted. His HRV plummets. His glucose meter, which we threw on him, shows that his levels, even during the ride, are low. His TSH had gone up quite high. If I remember correctly, he was normally about 1.5, and he was in the 4 to 5 range. Testosterone had plummeted. And so, we, through multiple conversations and tracking his food intake and all that, realized that he was, I won't say surreptitiously low carb, but Like it wasn't with the guidance of team staff. And so it took us a little while to figure out what was going on here, and reintroduce carbohydrate to him. And it actually took about 6 months for him to come back. He didn't get to do
Wow.
his big competition he was training for. There was some question of whether he'd recover at all, um,
Wow.
because he basically induced an overtraining syndrome from the dietary side, not from the training side.
Yeah.
Um,
Maladaptive syndrome that just takes time to
yeah,
work out of.
but he did. He got back. He's been continuing to compete since, and he enjoys his carbohydrates now. Interestingly, the altitude part is important because at altitude, at any effort, even just at rest, your body burns more, or a greater percentage of your caloric burn comes from glycogen than it does at sea level. So all of a sudden, he was probably teetering at sea level, and he went to altitude, and it was enough of a
Just tipped them
physiologic
over.
change. Yeah.
Hey, Kevin, that brings up an opportunity here to talk a little bit about exogenous ketones. And Delta G is sponsoring this webinar, but there's lots of great exogenous ketone products on the market. And this notion of hybrid fueling, where you're not in nutritional ketosis, but you're actually still taking exogenous ketones, and you can kind of get the best of both worlds. Anything you want to comment on with respect to that?
Yeah. I would disagree with some of that statement. But I've used Delta G with patients for years, and I think they make the best product out there, quite honestly. We used to use it back in the 2012, 13, 14, 15 range. We used it, and not but Elite Sport, everyone was using it as a third fuel. So you had
Yeah.
fat to burn, carbohydrate to burn, and then you had ketone.
Yep.
That has really fallen away in the elite ranks to where
Interesting.
you're unlikely to see it. The folks, it's still debated somewhat, but you won't see many high performing athletes using it that way. You will see a lot of recreational athletes using it that way because there's just a lag in the information transfer. But there was a study from a guy in Belgium a few years ago that showed with cyclists, and there's been multiple studies that show that it's probably not as clear as burning it as a third fuel. Probably doesn't help a whole lot, but it may increase the blood acidity to a point that if you're in a race or something and you're coming to a final climb, your ability to buffer acid is less than somebody who hasn't taken on ketone. So it's not really used much in races anymore. There is some good data to show that it could be used from a cognitive standpoint, or for a recovery
Understood.
standpoint. So with elite athletes, you'll see them taking it after they finish training and before bed.
Awesome. Yeah, I use it before bed sometimes as well, and I'll see nice little bump in the recovery stats. Okay, thanks for
Yeah.
clarifying that, Kevin.
Yeah.
Last one, case study number 3.
Yeah. So this is a guy that is not a professional athlete. He is a CEO, recreational athlete, is trained for years and years and years, has done this. And when we started working with him, saw that he was able to maintain a high training load. But if you looked at his week to week training load across years, it was a flat line. Now, that line was high on the graph, but he was just always pegged. And so
Yep.
working with him he wanted to see gains. He wanted to get to a point where he could continue to compete with everybody in this community that he raced against in the past, and was seeing that he was kind of falling away. And so we just initiated some periodization, some time off, some days that he goes hard, some days that he goes really easy, some days that he doesn't do anything, that he just sleeps in a bit, goes to work, eats a good meal, and frame that as training, right? Like that is part of your training. And so his curve of training load started to look like this, right? So he'd go hard, and then he'd recover and adapt and go hard again. And of course, his performance came up alongside that while actually training less. So another way that we could use training data to show a patient, to identify, but then also show the patient what's going on, give them a goal of what they want to see, and then reap the benefits of it.
Cool. Yeah, that periodization one I think is interesting to have a case study on that and how it reframing the off days as actually part of your training, I think is really interesting, and it's an effective way to position that. For me, even just building heads up, the day to day. Sometimes for me, just taking 2 days off and not actually working on it is actually working on it.
Yeah.
So it's
Oh,
it's
for
it's a
sure.
helpful way to train and a helpful way to just introduce these recovery breaks. So glad to see one on periodization here in the case studies. We do have a question
You
on
had,
the previous one. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was just going to say, you had mentioned while we were talking earlier, the it's often, I guess, assumed that athletes at like the Tour de France, if you measure their um, if you look at their blood, their hormones, their nutritional factors, whatever it is you want to look at blood, it looks at kind of catabolic breakdown. If you look at that before and after something like the Tour de France, that you're just going to see them totally decline and kind of implode at the end. And it's actually not the case. In 15 years of looking at these numbers, we see pretty much before and after pictures that look very, very similar from a blood work standpoint. Now they are tired as hell. I mean, they're fatigued, they're beat up. I'm not saying that. But with the proper support from a nutritional standpoint, sleep and recovery, really taking care of these athletes, 3 weeks in, their testosterone may look pretty much the same as it did to start. Cortisol may be the same. Their hemoglobin, hematocrit, sex hormone binding globulin will probably go up. But I don't. It's not a given by any means. And you'll even hear retired cyclists talking about this and just how terrible it looks. But that was a different era where they were doing lots of stuff besides just eating well and sleeping well. Lots of other stuff that would affect hormones. And so in a clean athlete who's well cared for, they can take on these loads in a way that's really, I think, surprising to a lot. And a lot of it comes down to this idea of periodization, and just how you care for the person during that time, how important recovery is to balance it.
Yeah, I know when you and I were talking, you had said that there's some misconceptions out there that you train at this level at the expense of your health at a certain level with lab results and even the biological age stuff. And I like the way you said it. You said assuming that individual athlete is well cared for, i.e., doing all the stuff we've talked about here, paying attention to recovery and environment and nutrition, and periodization, then you won't see that drop off when you're doing
Yeah.
the diagnostics, even after intense training, which I think is awesome, and maybe clears up some misconceptions about what you sacrifice when you really push yourself at extreme
I
levels.
think what's I think what's dangerous is the recreational athlete who sees the pro training 30 hours a week, says, "Well, I'm going to train 20 hours a week," and they do it, but they're sleeping 5 hours a night. The pro's sleeping 10. They're going to work after they train and sitting at a desk or doing stressful things for 8 hours. The pro's got his feet propped up. He's refueling. He's taking a nap. So it's really about the balance of expenditure to recovery. And if you get that balance right at any level, sure, there's an upper end. But at any reasonable level, you can do it well. But if that's out of balance at any level, it can cause problems.
A question on the previous case study, Kevin, with the carb load, and Dr. Gavin's wondering, was there a notable weight gain after that athlete started reintroducing carbs and working out of that maladaptive syndrome?
There was, I mean, notable. So yes, we're talking probably 3 to 5 kilograms, so 8 to 10 pounds, which was huge for a guy this size. But we actually counseled him that we wanted to see that, like that was a goal.
Got it.
And we would, a lot of that is glycogen, and it's water going back into the muscles. So it's not just that he put on, 4 kilos of fat, like that wasn't going to happen. But he did put on some fat. He got, a little less. His initial goals were to lose some weight, so that's challenging for a weight-based athlete to say, hey, your goal now is to put on some weight and recover. But I do think it's really beneficial in times like this to give them that goal very clearly and say, we
That
want to
makes
see that.
sense. Set the
I even tell my
expectation up
endurance
front.
athletes in the off season, like, I want you putting on some weight. Like, I want to see that scale line that we looked at, a 7-day average, go up, because through the season it tends to just kind of drift down. We want to recover that, being an anabolic state.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so wrapping it up, John and Kevin, maybe you can just share any parting shots here, and then we've got the giveaway to handle after this slide, and then we can wrap things up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the take home for me would be that working with high performance patients, whether that's professional athletes or folks who are just kind of going hard at everything they do, is you really need insight into what their actions and habits are. And you can get some of that from the conversation with them, but you miss a whole lot too if you don't have something objective. Now, if you try to do it just with objective numbers, you miss a lot. Also, I'm not saying the subjective is useless. It's half the picture, but you want to have both halves of the picture. So the data gathering needs to be robust, passive, so that they're not required to do a whole lot. It just flows in on your side, and regularly monitored, which I think is an important one that is often missed in practices. Yeah, I think that's the things you monitor are going to be different given the scenario, but knowing what you're looking for, knowing why you're looking at it, and what you're going to do with it is the most important.
Thanks, Kevin. John, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a list of questions. Unfortunately, they were all answered. So I think Dr. Sprouse went through it pretty methodically. Even though this talk is about high performance athletes, I think the method that you approach things with can be basically used for any kind of patient population. So I think my takeaway from this would be, yes, if you're working with high performance athletes, it's going to be a little bit more specialized, but the methodology that you presented can
Agreed.
apply to anybody. And I like the follow-up, and it's not too invasive, but it's tailored to a patient. However, you're looking at very specific metrics. Subjective, I think, obviously very important. Objective, very important. But the combination of the two is really the key. So it's like actual real medicine that you're practicing. So it's a great talk. Thank you.
I think also the one other thing I would add is that the workup can be in depth. The recommendation from it needs to be simple. And so if you've pulled in tons of data and crunched the numbers and tried to figure out what's going on, you can impress a patient, or try to, with this deep knowledge of the metabolism, and that you're going to do this at this step, and this at this step, and this here. But really, most patients, even at the pointy end of performance, the most effective and high yield advice is simple. They just need to know that that's the thing they need to do, as opposed to worry about all the minutia. So it's you make it easy for them to gather the data, but you get lots of data, crunch it on your end, and the output needs to be simple and doable.
Good point.
Thanks, guys. All right. So I've been monitoring the chat here as we've been going through the webinar, and our first winner is the Oura Ring. And Gavin Handley, are you still on the webinar? Dr. Gavin Handley was asking some great questions. So, okay, awesome. Thanks, Gavin. If you could get in touch with us afterwards, or we'll reach out to you, and we'll get you a sizing kit, and we'll get you an Oura Ring. And then we've got the True Diagnostic Test. That one's going to Corey Daniels. Corey asked some great questions during the webinar. So, Corey, we've got the True Diagnostic Kit coming your way. Thank you for keeping the chat active and engaging. Great questions. And then the Delta G ketones, that is going to Malav. I think I pronounced your name. Patching in from Australia, and it's 2 a.m. there. So we wanted to show some love to Malav for being on with us at this hour. So I be a little high for us on this one, but we got you. And then $100 heads up subscription, as I think she chimed in that she's just getting her heads up subscription on us. Thank you who participated in the chat here. And if you want to get any more information, hit that URL, scan the QR code, or just shoot us an email, support@headsuphealth.com. If you've got any questions for Dr. Sprouse.
Think we're losing him.
Oh,
okay. All right. So yeah, I think we lost Dave. So Dave, you there?
Am I back?
Yeah. Maybe Dr.
Sorry,
Sprouse.
guys. I think.
Yeah, I think if you want to just give them your contact information or where they can reach you if they have any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
For sure. Yeah, so my practice is Podium Sports Medicine, and that is podiumsportsmed.com. There's a link on there to email. It goes to my assistant, but they all get to me. So feel free to do that. That's probably the simplest way to do it.
Perfect.
All right, everybody.
All right, I think that wraps it up.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, John. Thanks,
Thank
Kevin.
you.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin.